Good day. So today we're going to report about the Commonwealth period in MINSUPALA, or in the history of Filipino Muslims and Indigenous people of MINSUPALA. So first are the events that precipitated the creation of the Commonwealth government in the Philippines. As soon as Filipinos thought that they have won the battle against Spain after 333 years of colonization, Filipinos were excited to imagine the United States returning their stolen independence. This was what the United States made clear when President McKinley said in the Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation that the Philippines are not theirs to exploit, but to develop, civilize, educate, and train in the science of self-government. Thus, as early as 1902, the United States had to pass a Philippine Bill which promised independence to Filipinos as soon as a stable government is established in the Philippines. But more than 10 years had already passed, yet there seemed to be no serious move on the part of the American government to really grant Philippine independence. Filipino politicians realized that the word soon was very ambiguous as it was not clearly defined in the bill how soon was soon. Thus, Filipino leaders lobby once more to pressure the American government to stand by their promise of independence. Along with other factors, Filipino pressure eventually succeed in convincing the United States to pass the Jones Law in 1916.
The Filipinos and the Art of Government. The U.S. Congress enacted the Jones Law on August 29, 1916. It was the first official document that clearly promised the Philippine independence as stated in its preamble, as soon as stable government was established. So the Jones Law simply reiterated what the Philippine Bill of 1902 promised, to grant Philippine independence as soon as a stable government is established therein. We can see here that these people, the Filipino politicians Sergio Osmeña, Manuel Rojas in 1931, and Manuel L. Quezon in 1933, really content themselves with the Jones Law because they suspected that the Americans' promise were ambiguous and no tangible actions. Thus, two successive independence missions were sent to the US. So to retrospect the events leading up to the Commonwealth before 1935. So, American Governor General appointed by the U.S. President headed the Philippine government. This started to change in December 1932 when the U.S. Congress passed the Hair-Cutting Act, which had the final goal of granting complete independence to the Philippines. So, however, the bill did not make several key concessions such as the end of American protectionist sugar tariffs and granting of free trade to the newly independent Philippines. So as a result, the Philippine Senate voted against it, and then Philippine President Manuel Quezon refused to support it. So in 1934, a new bill was enacted by the U.S. Congress and signed by American President Franklin Roosevelt called the Tidings-McDuffie Act. So, the later mission, which was headed by Manuel Quezon, eventually resulted to the Tidings-McDuffie Act, which created the Philippine Commonwealth. So, what is Tidings-McDuffie Act? So, it is officially known as the Philippine Independence Act. It is a United States federal law that established the process for the Philippines to become independent country. So one of the objective of the Tidings-McDuffie Act is to establish the parameters for the preparatory period. Some powers of supervision were reserved to the U.S. as well as the foreign diplomacy and currency. So in all other respects, the Philippines became self-governing. So the Tidings-McDuffie Act generally received large-scale support in the Philippines and was approved by the Philippine Senate. The first thing required for the new Commonwealth government was a new constitution which would serve as the bedrock of an independent nation. So the start of the Commonwealth period was inaugurated on the morning of November 15, 1935. So in ceremonies held in steps of Legislative Building in Manila. So The event was attended by around 300,000 people, and new government embarked on the ambitious um, nation-building policies and preparation for economic and political independence. So this included the National Defense Act of 1935, which would organize a conspiration of service in the country. So this also include greater control over the economy, the perfection of democratic institutions, reforms in education, improvement of transport, the promotion of local capital, industrialization, and colonization of Mindanao. So, lately we celebrate the Philippine Independence Day in June 12. So, why do Filipinos, why do we Filipinos consider that the date June 12, 1898 as our Independence Day when we have only been freed from the Spaniards and then the United States took over the Philippines immediately right after the Treaty of Paris. Why? Because um just as Diosdado Macapagal, a former president of the Philippines, said back in 1962 when he declared June 12, 1898 as our Independence Day as the official Philippine Independence Day. It was that easy, said that it is now our Independence Day, ordered on paper, signed it into the law, and then to June 12 is now our Independence Day. But seriously, though the simple answer to this question is that it was on June 12, 1898 when the revolutionary government of the Philippines, then led by the President Emilio Aguinaldo, proclaimed Philippine independence from Spain, and although the First Philippine Republic was defeated and fell under the American rule after a brutal and bloody war and genocide known as the Philippine-American War, and despite the fact that the current nation-state of the Philippines had only been officially independent since July 4, 1946 after World War II, June 12, 1898 remains officially so June 12, 1898 remains officially recognized and celebrated by millions of Filipinos around the world as our Independence Day. So, so the purpose of creating the Commonwealth, first, the Commonwealth was actually anchored on the self-proclaimed American mandate of educating and training the Filipinos in the science of self-government. So, it is supposed to be the ultimate exemplification of Filipinization where Filipinos could demonstrate that they were indeed capable of governing themselves and run their own affairs. So, so the aim of it is that to develop moral character, personal discipline, civic conscience, and vocational efficiency, and to teach the duties of citizenship. Second purpose was deemed to be transition period where the administrative skills of the Filipinos are honed before they could be granted absolute independence. The third, it was supposed to last 10 years from 1935 to 1945. However, due to the World War II, independence was only granted in 1946 after the Japanese colonization. So basically, I think of this is a sort of training wheels for the young Philippine government with the United States helping steer policy decisions so that when the Philippines finally received its independence and lost those training wheels, it would be able to be a self-sufficient new nation. So furthermore, the Philippine Commonwealth was also known as the Commonwealth of the Philippines or simply as the Commonwealth. So it had officially names in Malasariling Pamahalaan ng Pilipinas and Mancomunidad Filipina. The 1935 Constitution specifies Philippines as the country's short form name and uses Philippine Islands only to refer the pre-1935 status and institutions.
The issue of Philippine independence caused varied reactions to the Moros. Some Moros favored independence with the Christian Filipinos, while others wanted separate independence. Some Moros wanted to stay under the American rule forever. The Moros wanted independence with the Christian Filipinos, were mostly leaders who had benefited from the Philippine state systems. Those who had been closely associated with the Christian Filipinos in politics or businesses. They are also the Moros who realized that resistance was futile. The other Moros were sincere with their convictions and they treat Christian Filipinos as their brothers. The Moros who did not want the idea of becoming independent with the Christian Filipinos are those who considered Christian Filipinos as their traditional enemies. There are those Moros who fear that discrimination and inequality might occur. The Moros who wanted to stay under the American protection forever are those Moros that are contented with the American leadership. They are the Moros who find that Americans are kind, honest, and just. When Manuel L. Quezon assumed the Commonwealth presidency, he identified three major priorities. The first one, development of Mindanao for the sake of national economy. In 1935, the Commonwealth was faced with a depressed economy and he sees that Mindanao Sulu was the answer as it has vast, undeveloped agricultural lands. In other words, Quezon developed Mindanao not for the sake of its native inhabitants but for the sake of the Philippine government and economy. The second priority, which is the strengthening security in Mindanao as part of national security. The government of Quezon perceived two major threats to national security in Mindanao. The first is the existence of many non-Christian populations in Mindanao and Sulu. Quezon sees this as a threat because non-Christians were perceived to be non-loyal to the Philippine government. Second, the existence of the growing colony of Japanese agriculturists and entrepreneurs in Davao. This was also seen as a threat because of the Japanese expansionism. Those two threats led substantial members of the Christian natives from Luzon and Visayas to migrate to Mindanao and Sulu. The last priority, the advancement and integration of the Moro population. These seemed to cause harm than help. Quezon seemed to view that integration can only be attained by applying the same rules to Christian and non-Christians. He thought that what was okay to the Christian majority will also be okay to the non-Christian minority. This was probably the reason why HADJISALAM loan caused a rebellion against the Philippine government.
One of the effects of Quezon policies toward Mindanao's indigenous people, the Moro and Lumads, was the abolishment of various laws that were supposedly in favor of the Moros and Lumads during the Commonwealth period. One of these is the Bureau of Non-Christian Tribes. It is supposedly the only government agency that time that tries to meet the special needs of the non-Christians. However, it was abolished during the Commonwealth period. Second is the Moro Board. This was supposedly established in order to settle some religious disputes according to the traditional laws. The justification of Manuel Quezon for abolishing these laws is to force Moros to take their cases and problems to the regular court of justice. What Quezon did not realize was that what he did only destroyed the traditional system of governance of the local people in Mindanao that was already working well that time. There are lessons that can be learned from the Commonwealth period in MINSUPALA. It started in the concept of the Commonwealth period, which was actually to provide a good training ground for Filipino leaders in preparation for their eventual independence that was promised by the United States. It was supposed to be a learning opportunity for all, not only for a specific group but for all Filipinos, regardless of religious and ethnic affiliations. Yet, while the Christian Filipino politicians were happy about this development in MINSUPALA, the Moros and Lumads, the non-Christians, however, felt that they were largely excluded in this development. Quezon's policies toward Mindanao were understandably to strengthen a starting central government. He ought to demonstrate power, will in the hope of earning the obedience and respect of his constituents, especially the people in Mindanao. However, this kind of policy cannot be expected to promote national solidarity and cohesiveness. If a government wanted to exploit the natural resources of a certain community, it should return the benefits to that community if it wants to earn the latter's respect and loyalty. All in all, Quezon's policies became a source of insecurity for many of the Moros and Lumads in Mindanao. If only there were consultations where people's opinions were seriously taken into consideration before imposing a highly unitary and centralized form of government, perhaps rebellion, secessionism, and armed conflicts is not a problem today in our country. If there are ultimate lessons to learn from this part of our history, it would be the lesson of multi-stakeholders approach and inclusive governance and development. By those terms, we actually mean that for major issues to be resolved, we need to consult the various stakeholders. For example, in a country, we need to consult the people, the constituents, regardless of religious and ethnic affiliations, regardless of the diversity, in order to come up with compromises and win-win solutions for everyone.